On August 4th, 2024, fans around the world witnessed arguably the greatest ever 100 meters final in Olympic history. During the entrances of the athletes, the race favourite Noah Lyles burst through the doors not with a walk, but with a roaring set of energetic bounces. These carried him a good 15 metres up the track away from his opponents, who had all rather more calmly taken to their respective lanes. For Lyles, this was the first step to channeling his pre-race nerves in a way that filled him with the confidence to execute. However, this routine was not complete, because if Lyles kept up that energy as he settled into the starting blocks, he would have been too hyped up, something that could easily lead to a false start or a far from free-flowing race. So in the last seconds prior to the race, he brought himself way back down. The cameras caught him repeatedly uttering the words to himself, "Thank you, God." This was of course spiritual, but it was just as much psychological. At that moment, Lyles was practicing what's known as grounding self-talk, a technique that allowed him to channel his nerves into focused energy. And a couple of minutes later, Lyles crossed the line first to win Olympic gold by just 5,000ths of a second. So what on earth was Lyles playing at? Why did he go from explosive WWE style entrance to a calm, grounded competitor in the space of a couple of minutes? Well, it's all part of a wider strategy, one where Lyles has got to a point where he's able to leverage and use his pre-race nerves to his advantage. He can strategically channel nervous and anxious energy into a fuel that has made him become the fastest man in the world. And the good news is, the same strategies can be used by all athletes. Whether you're also a track athlete gearing up for a race, a fighter heading to the ring for a bout, or playing any kind of game or match, you can use your nerves to help your performance rather than hinder it. And this video will tell you exactly how. Right, so what exactly was happening in those final moments before Noah Lyles won Olympic gold? To understand, let's talk about the Yerkes-Dodson Law. The principle explains the relationship between arousal levels, in other words, how pumped up or calm you are, and your performance. And the idea is simple. Too little arousal and you're understimulated. Too much and you're overwhelmed. But there's a sweet spot in the middle where your performance peaks. That's where the magic happens. For athletes, finding this optimal arousal state is crucial. Get it wrong and your nerves might just sabotage your performance. Get it right and those same nerves can become your greatest asset. So the first thing athletes must realize is that you actually do want to feel some of the physical characteristics of being nervous before performances. Because if you don't, that's where you're understimulated. And if that happens, your body won't wake up quick enough to run a fast race, or you won't be as reactive as your opponents and they'll sweep you aside. But you don't want these feelings to become too intense. You don't want your heart rate to increase so much that it feels like it's bursting out of your chest. Or you don't want the butterflies in your stomach to feel so intense that you want to puke. Because in those moments where you're over-aroused, you're more prone to making mistakes, errors, or have poor form and execution because you're too tense or just too agitated. Instead, and this is the difficult part, you want to find the sweet spot where you're hyped up but not too hyped up, but at the same time you're composed but not too calm to the point where you're not switched on at all. So how as an athlete can you use this law to your advantage? Well, the key is managing your arousal levels through what I call uppers and downers. Uppers are techniques that boost your energy and get you fired up. Think of things like upbeat music, high energy warm-ups, or even a powerful pep talk. These are great for sports where you need explosive power like sprinting or weightlifting. On the flip side, downers are all about calming your nerves, bringing you back down to a state of focused relaxation. Techniques like deep breathing, grounding self-talk, or even visualizing a peaceful scene in your mind. This is especially useful in sports that require precision and control like archery or pistol shooting. Now here's where it gets tricky. Finding this balance isn't something that happens overnight. It takes years of practice, self-awareness, and experimentation. Athletes like Noah Lyles have spent countless hours fine-tuning their approach to pre-performance arousal. They've learned how to read their bodies and minds perfectly, understanding when they need to ramp up the energy and when they need to dial it back. So if we look at Lyles before the 100 meters Olympic final, you could argue that he uses his explosive entrance to really hype himself up and even deliberately take himself into the high arousal zone. And then he engages in his grounding self-talk to just nudge himself back into the optimal arousal zone just before getting into the starting blocks. And sometimes certain uppers like Noah Lyles' hyped up entrance actually burns off some of that excess nervous energy so that you're then forcing your mind and body to then nudge back into the greater sense of calmness and composure that's required for peak performance. The ability to shift between these states with precision is what sets elite athletes apart. It's not just about knowing the techniques, it's about mastering the timing and intensity of each one. And that's something that takes a lot of time, patience, and a lot of trial and error to get right. But once you do, it can make all the difference between a good performance and a gold medal winning one. So how can you start applying these techniques to your own game? Well, it's impossible for me to say because honestly, it varies so much sport to sport and also what type of competitor and athlete you are. But here are 3 simple steps so that you can work this out for yourself. 1. Identify your optimal arousal level. Take the time to actually understand how your body reacts under different levels of arousal. Reflect on past performances to identify when you felt just right, meaning you're not too hyped up, but also not too calm. This self-awareness is the foundation for mastering your optimal pre-performance state. 2. Experiment with uppers and downers. Incorporate both uppers and downers into your pre-game routine. Test out different combinations to see what works best for you. For example, try some deep breathing or meditation a couple of hours before your event starting if you're feeling overly nervous. And then use some hype music to bring you up in the last 30 minutes or so before performing. And if you're struggling for ideas here, I've put together a simple list of 30 effective uppers and downers. You can check that out using the link below. It's completely free. And then lastly, refine through practice. Remember, this is a process that takes time. Continuously refine your approach by practicing these techniques during training and less critical competitions. Just like an actor rehearses his or her lines, you need to rehearse these routines so that come the real performance, they run like clockwork and you just have full trust and confidence in them. And if you consistently do this, over time you'll develop a routine that reliably puts you in that optimal arousal state. And there's also one other super important thing that every athlete must do in order to successfully use their nerves to their advantage. So to find out what that is, check out this next video here.